Well, we can get started whenever makes sense for you. And so I'll just start by saying, my name is Ashlyn. I am the community manager for social enterprise Minneapolis-St. Paul. We're really lucky to welcome the folks from Generator who are spread across the Midwest. They have an incredible range of programs, accelerators, support systems, and networks in cities across the Midwest supporting entrepreneurs, and they have an entire social impact sector that we're really lucky to have. And so I want to make sure that we give them some time to share a little bit about who they are, what they do, and their work in the social impact sector. So I'll just push it right on over to you.
Cool. That was an awesome intro. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, everyone. We're so glad to have you all today. So Mfoniso and I are from a company called Generator, which is an accelerator program kind of based in the Midwest, but we're all over the place now. So as Ashlyn said, we have our social impact team, which is kind of a smaller sector of the Generator team. So there's myself, who's a social impact director based here in Madison, Wisconsin. We're also joined by Lauren Usher, who's the managing director of our team, and Mfoniso, who's the social impact director based in Milwaukee. So I just want to give a brief overview of what Generator is, and then we'll kind of dive more into the content. So in a nutshell, Generator is a platform for supporting the creative economy, which means that we like to find the best and brightest startup founders. So we do that through a variety of different programmings, and our social impact team is one dimension of that platform. So we have two priority areas that have come from our collaboration with our sponsor, which is the American Family Insurance Institute for Corporate and Social Good, which we just call the Institute for short. And so those two priority areas are educational equity, which it really focuses on K through 12 equity, and criminal justice reform, which includes topics like reentry, recidivism, and economic prosperity for people that have had some type of justice involvement. So the main way that we support entrepreneurs through Generator and in our social impact team is through our programs. In social impact, we have our two main programs, but one is called G Alpha, which is a 4-week venture creation workshop, which is really for founders that are just getting started. Maybe they've had an idea for a couple of years or a couple of months, and they want to actually get started on that business. It's also good for founders that are just interested in entrepreneurship, but they don't have any business idea at all. They can actually start the program with no business idea at all. So it's a free 4-week program that helps them build the foundations of their business. And we'll talk about some of the things that we work with the entrepreneurs today in today's session. We also have G Beta, which is our 7-week pre-accelerator program that's for for-profit social enterprises. We are currently accepting applications for our G Beta program. They close next week on October 2nd. So if you are interested in that, please visit the Generator website and check out the G Beta social impact page. So in G Beta, we're really looking for for-profit companies that are a little bit more established. They've, usually been around for a while. They're really high growth, high traction, high impact, and we're looking to help them take their company to the next stage. So let's talk about some of the founders that we work with and really supporting social entrepreneurs of all kinds. So the number one question we get is, where should I start? And it's such a good question too, because really, if you're new to business and entrepreneurship and the startup world, it can just feel like there's all of these things flying around you and you're not really sure where to start. So what we recommend is that we work on the business foundations first. And this is really like the type of work that we do in our G Alpha program. So in a nutshell, we're helping the founders answer the core questions about their business. a lot of this sounds very obvious, but when we get into the types of questions that we have, we see that they're simple questions with really complex answers. So for example, the very first question we start with is, what problem are you solving? And especially in social enterprises, this is a really, really big question. So the reason why this is really the first place we start with is that if there is not a problem to solve, we really don't have a business to work with. And also, you know, with social entrepreneurs, we want to really make sure that we're thoroughly understanding the problem that we're trying to solve so that we don't end up, you know, creating like a misguided solution or one that ends up doing more harm than good. There's also questions like, who are you and what are you? Again, really, really simple questions, but when we get into it, defining what your company is actually surprisingly difficult. Not to mention that when you have perhaps a co-founder or, you know, other founding members on the team, trying to get everyone to agree on that is also a challenge too. So, you know, we really focus on like, what is that noun that you are? Are you a restaurant, a co-op, a software company, a community center? Getting that noun is surprisingly difficult for teams. So that's something we work on as well. Another part of coming up with the business foundations is, what do you do and why should people care? And so, you know, to kind of continue with that, like language analogy, I say like, these are your verbs. You know, what are the verbs that you do and what are the services you're providing? We see a lot with social entrepreneurs is they want to take on the world, and that's great. We love that enthusiasm, and that we need that in social impact. We need that. I'm going to solve huge problems because that's what they are doing. But what comes along with that sometimes is wanting to do so many things at once that it's hard to give some focus to the business too. So we say, what actually are you doing and what are you not doing? Because those are two really important questions that really go hand in hand. And, you know, we also think about like, well, why should people care? Like, what's the value that you're adding? You know, what are they using right now? What are the existing alternatives, and why would they switch over to your solution too? You know, sometimes like the status quo or no solution at all is what you're up against too. And that's a really big consideration. You know, sometimes we'll hear like the companies say, I have no competition, or there's no one else doing what I'm doing. And, you know, maybe there's some elements of truth to that, but you're also fighting against, they might just be used to no solution at all. And so that's a really big part of that too. So we also focus on things like whether they're customers, who are paying customers and who are beneficiaries, what is your market size? So I think all of these, when we say the business foundations, is like simple questions, complex answers is really what we're looking for here. So that was probably a lot, and you might be feeling overwhelmed of like, okay, now I have all of these questions that this guy from Generator just told me I have to answer, and I don't think I wrote any of them down, or I didn't catch all of them. But that's okay. There's a tool called the Business Model Canvas. So to set the stage for what this tool is, so previously, and this still happens, you know, where teams will write their formal business model, which is like a formal written document of all of the aspects of their business. And that's great. And that's still needed today, you know, if you're going to get a loan from a bank or something like that. But sometimes a full business model is just too much for early stage companies. And because we make changes to the company so often and things are so kind of like half-baked at that stage, we want something that's more constructive and it's more flexible and allows us to still have a guided discussion about the company while also answering all of those foundational aspects. So really a business model canvas is a roadmap to success. So I have a picture of, this is the diagram that we use in social impact. If you Google business model canvas, you'll find a wide variety of models that, you know, they'll have different boxes on here. They'll be structured differently. They have different language. This one, I like to say that this is our social impact business model canvas. And really, like, we try and make this very friendly and non-intimidating. And you can see based on the boxes that we have here, when we start to go through this, we have a nice guided conversation about our business. It's on one page. We can visually see all aspects of the business, and we're not getting lost in the detail of a 30-page business model. So this is a really great, I like to describe this as a living document too. You know, sometimes it can feel that the business model canvas is like, that's for the early stage companies, and that's not for me. I think this is a great thing to revisit every couple of months in the early stage, and at least every year as you're going, because you might make pivots, you might have new revenue streams, new customers, things like that. So the way I like to recommend we go through this with the teams is that we start in the top left with the problem. Again, if we don't have a problem to solve, we don't have a product or service to offer. And I kind of like to make a little bit of a game out of it and say that we can only go to boxes that are touching the one we've already answered. So if we start with the problem, we can only go to existing alternatives, key metrics, or solutions first. And I like to go to the solution next. And we have this like really nice guided discussion, and you see that the business model canvas is structured so well that really the cornerstones of the business model canvas are the cornerstones of your business. And I also like that kind of like symbolically and literally the purpose is at the center of your business. And it's also the center of your business model canvas too. And so it's divided in two halves. On the left-hand side, we have all of the things that describe your product. On the right-hand side, all of the things that describe your market. And really where they meet in the middle is like your unique value proposition, your purpose, your social impact. All right, so the next question we get all the time is, how do I know if my idea is good or not? Well, we don't know. That's the short answer in a nutshell. Is despite what your friends, family, your generator staff, accelerator staff, whatever, we can give a really good idea, but ultimately the people that will tell you if your business is a good idea or not are your customers. And so that's where it comes down to, you need to validate your business idea. So the best way to do this is to test it out. And we like to say the phrase, fail fast and fail early. And the reason for that is, one, failure is not as scary as it sounds. It's not failure with a capital F. It's just like feedback early on is, I think, a really good way to think of it, is that we don't want to put so much time and effort into a solution without validating it first. And so that's why it's okay to have something that's maybe a little bit half-baked or half-formed, and we're testing that out early on. Very much like the business model canvas, when you think about it, where we don't want to dive into a 30-page document because we're not really sure if that's the direction we want to go. We want to test it out with something smaller too. And so we're kind of like already getting entrepreneurs to think about this idea of what's like a smaller version of something that I can do to test my idea to see if it's good and get it in the hands of my potential customers, because ultimately they are the ones that will decide if your business is a good one or not. So let's assume that you've validated your idea. Now what do you do? We encourage you to test it out. And this is still, I think this is part of the validation process and part of the continuing to validate process. We encourage people to start small and work your way up. So here I have like kind of the stages of product development. And, this could be a product, a service, you name it. We'll encourage people to start with their minimum viable product or their MVP. And this is a way to test the big questions about your business first before moving on. So let's say our product is ultimately that we want to sell speedboats. We probably don't want to go out and buy a bunch of speedboats and just hope that that's what our customers want and hope that the market can afford that. Some of the bigger questions might be like, do people want to travel by boat? And so do we need a speedboat to validate that? Not quite. We could validate that with something that's more affordable, like a canoe. And maybe the canoe is something that we make on our own, but we're answering these big questions first of like, do people want to travel by water? Like, what are parts of that experience? Maybe they go in the canoe and say, that was great, but I want something a little bit faster. And we say, okay, so that validates my idea that maybe a speedboat actually is something that they want too. So you can see, you know, with your business too, and with social impact companies, we see like, well, what's the problem that we're solving? And is this on the right path? You know, a canoe is not a speedboat, and we're not going to pretend that it is, but it's at least answering some of those questions too, so we can work our way up. And the idea here is that we're going to avoid a lot of frustration and potentially really costly mistakes by validating first, then proceeding with a market solution. So I'll turn things over to Mfoniso now.
Thanks, Joe. And now it's a good time to just check in with everyone and see where you guys are from. It looks like we have 14 folks in here. Can we use the chat feature for people to just let us know where they're from? A couple Wisconsin-based folks. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Minneapolis, of course. Minneapolis. Cool. Cool. Lots of Midwest pride going on. Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let's talk a bit about entities. So you've done all this work to get started. Maybe the next step is figuring out what kind of company you want to be. And one of our most frequently asked questions is, don't I need to be a nonprofit to have a good social mission? The short answer is no, and the long answer is it depends. We emphasize to our founders that legal considerations really shouldn't drive your business model. It should always be the other way around. And the four main types of business entities each have different benefits, drawbacks, and depending on your business idea, they might be for you. So corporation, limited liability company, benefit corporation, or non-stock corporation, for example, a nonprofit. And the characteristics of each of these entities is specific to a certain state statute, so they might differ from state to state, but it's usually pretty easy to find your specific state's requirements. Then we'll go to the next slide. So I have this flowchart here that was provided to us by the local law and entrepreneurship clinic out of UW-Madison, which I'll talk more about later, but it helps answer some of these questions that I want to talk about. So when you're deciding to form your business, there are several questions you should be asking. Where will your funding come from? Are there certain tax implications specific to your venture? How will the entity be managed? Will the entity need to convert to another entity in the future, or do you want to have that option? Does your business have a social mission? Without going too much into the weeds about shareholders, boards, and officers, tax rates, I'll just highlight those main four we've been talking about. So for corporations, these are typically scalable ventures that need significant outside investment. So think venture capitalists. For LLCs, limited liability corporations, they are best suited when outside investment is not required. You have a small number of owners or a single owner, and you're operating solely within one state. That being said, it's easier to convert from an LLC to a corporation rather than vice versa. B Corps you might be less familiar with. Benefit corporations are a type of for-profit entity that has a social impact. And a business can apply to become a certified benefit corporation by applying to BLAB, which is a nonprofit organization that makes those certification decisions. Like I said, these are newer designation. So even here in Wisconsin, the benefit corporation statute was just enacted in 2018. Some popular examples of B Corps that you might be familiar with are Kickstarter, which is a crowdfunding platform, Patagonia, which is a apparel company, and Ben & Jerry's, which makes really good ice cream. For nonprofits, your source of revenue is often your deciding factor when you're making a choice between nonprofit and a for-profit entity. So if donations and grants are your primary source of revenue, then a nonprofit is probably your best choice. That being said, nonprofit organizations are subject to more rules and requirements, including like public disclosures and things like that, which may reduce your autonomy. So just some things to consider. Also, if your venture starts as a nonprofit, it can be very costly and time-consuming to convert to a for-profit business. But back to those essential questions we were talking about. So let's talk about funding. So do you rely on volunteers, grants, donations? Well, then you might want to be a nonprofit. You need significant then you might want to be a corporation. Is it important for you to have the community involved in a board of directors sort of role? Well, there's some overlap with those options. So there you could be a corporation, you could be a B Corp, or even a nonprofit. Is your social mission important but not the only pillar for your company? Then maybe considering a B Corp. And if that mission is the most important quintessential element to your business, then maybe you want to be a nonprofit. And I admit that this is complex and it's messy and it's kind of confusing even for me. So legal expertise isn't something, or is something that you or your company is interested in. What I would recommend is finding your local law and entrepreneurship clinic near you or within your state if you'd like to apply for free legal services from them. And then we'll go to our next slide. Okay, so how do I? We primarily use pitch decks and executive summaries. You're probably more familiar with a pitch deck, but essentially what you want to do is cover you and your company's background, how you got started, if you have any relevant qualifications or anything like that, any exciting news or announcements, which is what we refer to as traction. This can be customers, sales, partnerships, things like that. And you always have some sort of traction. Traction is kind of, if you think about, a tire, it's really how you're just propelling yourself forward or getting up that mountain or whatever. So even if it's day one of your business, you still have traction. So let's say you thought of your idea yesterday, and today you called like 50 different school districts or 50 different bail organizations. Tell us about those reach outs, because that's traction. Aside from that, you also want to walk the person through how you're using your product or service and explain what the market opportunity is. We've all heard a pitch before, whether it was one of your buddies or one of those TV shows you watched. And we've all heard bad pitches. And if you listen to a pitch and walked away confused or not knowing exactly what the person was doing or what they said they were going to do, then it probably wasn't the greatest pitch. And after someone's listened to your pitch, they should know who you are, what your company is, what your product or your service is, and how you plan to make money with it, or how you have been making money with it, and what the opportunity is. Next, we can talk about executive summaries. So an executive summary is a 2-page outline of an investment opportunity and why the investor should want to learn more about this. You don't need to explain everything about your business in just one document, just enough to get them to understand it and enough for them to be interested in it. And the executive summary is meant to be done more quickly than a traditional business plan, and it's a lot more grounded in reality than predictions. One good way to think about it is that business plans are more for banks, and executive summaries are more for venture capitalists. Honestly, they just won't read through that long 20, 30, 50-page document, but you probably get them to read a 1 or 2-pager. And investors or other interested parties might ask for your pitch deck, but since your pitch deck is usually pretty visual, and something that you usually want to get delivered in person so that they understand it. When they ask for that, you want to send this instead. A couple things to remember: don't get too jargony. And middle schoolers should be able to understand it. Also, be sure to reuse your company name and use very active verbs. So things like Company X provides, or Company X offers, or Company X changes. Those things are a lot more impactful. And they also can kind of reaffirm the name of your company so that, the person reading it can kind of walk away with a great understanding or a good remembrance of what you're doing. Yeah. And for our next slide.
There it goes.
Okay. So measuring impact. When it comes to measuring your impact, first you need to figure out what exactly you're measuring. This is another of those how, what, who questions that we really like. So how are you defining success for your company? What is defined as success? Another question is, who are you trying to help? So for your purpose or the point of your company, think long term. So what specific issue are you hoping to address? Is it educational equity? Is it criminal justice reform? Hunger, homelessness, climate change? What specifically is your purpose? This isn't a vision statement. This is a clearly defined problem. Also, how are you measuring it? What outcomes are successful? Does your product or your service is hoping to increase literacy rates, employment rates? What specifically are you quantifying to indicate that you've achieved your goal or that you're working towards achieving your goal? Also important to remember, how often will you track that data? Is it something you want to track weekly, monthly? Is it something you're looking at yearly? There are certain things like, especially with life outcomes, that can definitely take longer. So that cycle that you're using to measure might need to change depending on what exactly you're tracking. We'll go to the next slide. Oh, one other point about measuring your impact is that you may not need a data analyst today, but it is something that maybe you want to have a consult for, or even find a mentor that's pretty knowledgeable in that area. Yeah. On to resources. Okay. So as far as resources, the is really your oyster. If it's books that you're interested in, there's lots of recommendations that we can make there. Two books that we love here at Generator are The Lean Impact, which essentially trains you to understand a very lean methodology in creating your business and developing it. There's also Lean Impact, which has a focus on social impact. There's also lots of newsletters and things like that, YouTube videos. Other platforms that I like, because I especially like to rely on people a lot. I love LinkedIn and Facebook to connect with people, or even to find people to reconnect with that might be able to help. There are also events like these that take place pretty periodically that you can find on other social media platforms, as well as like Meetup and things like that. Joe and I have also Joe more so, Joe like specifically has kind of curated this trove of resources that we use for our teams. So maybe we can kind of find a way to pass that along to you guys. But yeah, we know it can feel very overwhelming. Even in an hour here, we try to truncate as much as we could to try to boil it down to, legitimate steps on the road to, a successful company. But yeah, at each step of the way, there's just so much to kind of, go on a tangent for and do a deep dive into. So we really want to leave some time for questions here and learn more about you guys. So yeah. So do we have any questions about anything we covered today?
Looks like Lauren is managing the chat really well, which is great. Some people are sharing some of their business ideas. I just want to share, if you want to join, on video and ask a question, or audio, you can do that as well. I'm welcoming Lauren.
Yeah. Cool. So while we're waiting for questions, maybe could you talk a little bit about some of the common pitfalls that we see that are either unique to social impact companies or just startups in general, especially at that GL stage?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll probably go back to one of the earlier points you made about coming in and wanting to do so much and tackle so much. We love when people come in with that passion, because those are the people that we're looking for. But especially with our programs, having them be 4 weeks or 7 weeks, we really got to hone in on what specifically can we actually try to do within that time frame. So if it's building out your website, your team, your company, your product, all those things, probably not, but maybe we can tackle kind of an aspect of that. And that's kind of also where I would say, you want to lean on that, no pun intended, lean on that lean startup method of just tackling one problem, iterate, and then moving on to the next one. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll add on to that too. I think Mfoniso's point is really spot on. And another thing that I think is almost like a side effect or a result of that is a lot of teams don't know who their customers are. And, it's back to that business model canvas of these really simple questions like, well, who your customers are? Well, it sounds like, well, of course we should know this, but what I think really happens is that when they want to do so many things, they offer so many different products, they offer so many different services, and it really like changes the scope of who is a customer at that point, because you might be providing, food services or health services or a software platform or all of these different things, which sounds like, maybe you do want to have a comprehensive solution to your company, and that's fine. But think about, for each of those, there are different customers that come into play, and you want to really know like who is a good customer too, because that is also a really core part of high growth, is knowing who your customers are, and that you can use what's called lookalike customers to say, well, I've got this one awesome client, and now I want to go get more like them. So you can look at what makes that client in terms of their demographics or what they're looking for, lots of different things, and then using that strategically to grow your company from there.
Mm-hmm. I have a question. What would you recommend founders when they're first getting their ideas off the ground? Who should be on their quote unquote board of directors as like first mentors or people that they can ask questions to as they're growing? Who are maybe those first types of people that they should be trying to build a mentorship relationship with?
Yeah, great question. I know probably Lauren and Mfoniso have things to add too, so I'll let them add on. One thing that comes to mind is a lot of teams need legal support. So, having someone that is either a current lawyer or, law professors, anyone that's like really familiar, or it could even be someone who owns their own business and has gone through that legal process themselves. So that seems to be a really special consideration too, especially, when we get into things with like protected data, working with currently incarcerated folks, health data. There's a lot of like legal considerations to make there. Another one that I think is really, really advantageous to have is an industry expert, and that could be someone who, we have teams that are building a physical product. And so it's maybe someone that knows a lot about supply chain or distribution or plastic injections, or maybe it's that they are doing something in healthcare and they have, a nurse or a doctor on their team. So I think that like legal support plus industry expertise is like really, really spot on. And it's sometimes hard to find those experts, but those are the two that come to mind. Lauren and Mfoniso, I don't know if you have anything to add on to that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would also just add, I think founders should also kind of consider, is there a company or is there a sort of company that they want to try to emulate and sort of see what practices they do and things that they can kind of, try to take from that and say, I need someone who can kind of do some of this and someone who can do some of this, because they might not have super traditional roles that they can exactly, like find on a job ahead or something like that. But if they know the kind of people that they want, that might be a good starting place too. I would also kind of think about, what kind of domain expertise do you have as a founder? Because oftentimes you might overlook or be too humble about, your own qualifications. So, if you're a teacher or you're someone that, works with relation that you want to provide a product or service to, consider, what you can do in that regard before you kind of try, hiring on or trying to build too big before you're really ready for that kind of growth.
Yeah, I think you two hit it. Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren. I work with Mfoniso and Joe at Generator. I agree with everything you both said. I think thinking about your strengths and areas of opportunity that you're looking for will help to identify what you're missing. So you might not know who you want to meet, but you'll know that you don't know anything about tech, or that you don't know, like Joe mentioned, the legal aspects or the data aspects of your business. So just kind of identifying those holes will help you to at least know the problem within your business that you have. And then you can network and brainstorm, like, who would be able to help me fill that hole? And the only other thing I'd add for mentorship is, you might not meet the very first person that you identify as a mentor and say, like, all right, that's it. I've got my business mentor. Now we're going to be in this relationship for the next 10 years. It's kind of like dating. You might have to kind of shop around a little bit. So one of the things that we do at Generator is we encourage entrepreneurs to meet with a lot of mentors and just have a 20-minute conversation with them, pitch your business, get their feedback. And while you're doing that, you're kind of understanding their style and seeing how it clicks with you. And then maybe you just say, like, thanks for that feedback today. This was a great meeting, and you move on. Or maybe you say, wow, like, this 20-minute meeting was so productive and we really are just like vibing together and I can't wait to meet you again. And then you can set up a next meeting and a next meeting and kind of build a mentor relationship that really works for you. So don't get committed to someone and get yourself into a long-term relationship before you know that it's a mentorship that works. So that's what I would add. Another question I thought that we could pose, just kind of thinking of some of the ideas that Allison and Paul and Temi shared in the chat. Like what, and I don't know what stage, the folks in here are at, but when you have kind of identified, this is the mission that I want to accomplish, or this is kind of the idea that I have for my business, like, how do you do that first step? Like, what do you do to actually get started? Because I think, all three of us talk to a lot of people who are really excited and passionate and motivated to make this change, but like taking that first step feels really, really big. So I'm wondering how you could break that down a little bit for people who are really early in the process.
I think it requires a lot of research on that front end, founder specifically. So if there's an area that you're super passionate about, like housing, I just saw someone said something about housing. Look up what's available in your city, because sometimes you might come in with certain assumptions. You might say, "Oh, nobody's doing this," or "Nobody's doing this," and then you find that those assumptions get challenged because there is an organization or a company that is addressing that, or there's a reason that can't be addressed. And then maybe that's an obstacle that you can overcome, or maybe it's something that you kind of have to pivot from and think about how can you kind of attack the problem from a different angle. So I would kind of go back to, the business model canvas that Joe went through, where the first step is, what specifically is the problem? And then what specifically is your solution? And then what else is out there? And then how is this kind of different? And even if there is, or there are potential solutions that are in the market, and maybe they're further along, or they're big, massive corporations, like an Amazon or Facebook, maybe you can do something a little differently. You don't always have to capture the entire market share. You can always just, capture a small component of it.
Yeah, I think that's really great too. And to add on to that, so you mentioned doing research and understanding the problem. I think when we've worked with teams in G Alpha where they're very early stage and they come in and talk about these really big systemic issues. And, again, it's it seems like we know what the problem is, but do we really? And I think one helpful discussion we've had with teams is distinguishing between what's the cause and what's the symptom, and where does your business fit in? Are you alleviating the symptoms? Because that's absolutely important too. We don't have time to wait for years of change. There are people that need assistance right now. And so, if that is your solution, know that that's where you fit in. And other times it's helpful to say, well, for example, if they're dealing with homelessness, that might be a symptom of some really deep underlying causes. And so, maybe if your business wants to attack more directly at those root causes, like let's have a discussion about that and let's do some research into that. So I think that's a really good discussion to say, like, let's continue. It's like this discussion of like, I know this problem, and then I research to what the big problem is, and then I research what the symptoms are, and then I research what the root cause is. And, it's just like having that guided discussion, which is really good. And, sometimes just sitting down with a friend or a family member, your dog, a stuffed animal, and just like talking about it out loud is more helpful than you might think.
Sounds like a good process for when someone has the passion area, but they don't know what the solution is yet.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so kind of narrowing in on the problem as a first step. I think we do a lot of that in G Alpha.
Yeah, for sure.
We've talked a bit about participants and mentors, but one other thing I want to talk about were investors. I think that another pitfall, to go back to the first question, is that a lot of folks can kind of jump the gun in terms of asking for money too soon. And it really does depend on your specific business. Maybe you are earlier than someone else with a similar product or service, but you're more investable or backable at that time than the other person. But one thing we preach to our founders and our teams is that you never want to ask for advice. So when you are in conversation with an investor or a potential supporter, if you're a nonprofit, ask them for ways that they can not necessarily mentor you, but give you any guidance or feedback on what your company is, on what your product is, or what your service is, ways you can improve your company. Because you'll have one to two outcomes. Either one, they'll say, do X, Y, and Z, and now you've made yourself a better company. Or they're like, I think you're kind of where you need to be, and I'd love to have a conversation about, potentially, funding this initiative. So, one thing we encourage founders to do is always ask for advice.
Yeah, I think underlining that, another time that comes into play is when you're emailing someone who maybe you want to be your mentor, or you're just kind of interested in what they're doing, and it feels like a good fit with what you want to do. And the way that this will come out is people will ask us, what should I say to them? What do I say in the email when I'm introducing myself? And like Mfoniso said, ask for feedback. If you email someone and you say, hey, I see the work that you're doing, it's really impactful, and I'm inspired by it. I was wondering if you could give me some feedback on an idea that I have. Nine times out of 10, people are going to say yes to that. Whereas again, if you sound like you're selling to them, or if you're asking them, I want to see if you'll invest in me, you might get a no from that kind of response. And you'll get a lot more helpful advice and feedback if you just ask for it.
Amazing. Well, I know we'll probably get cut off of time here pretty quickly, but I am so appreciative of all three of you for taking the time to put this together. I know the recording will be available for an unlimited number of times. So if you want to come back to it, it'll be in the Twin Cities Startup Week platform. We'll send it out as well. We love the accelerators and the programs that Generator has put together. So please feel free to follow them on social media. They're always doing amazing work and workshops, and we'll continue to push out their content and follow up with you on ways in which you can stay engaged with Generator. So thank you so much for all of your time. And I hope to see some people in the chat in your next cohort.
Yeah, we do too.
Appreciate it.
Amazing. All right. Thanks so much, everyone. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.